What Roe versus Wade, what the ability to have abortions introduced in much of the country at that time introduced was the ability of someone to not have a child who they didn't want to have. Being born to a mother who doesn't want to have you, that turns out to be a pretty big predictor of life not going well after that. One of the most interesting studies that's ever occurred in this realm came out about 15 years ago. One law professor here at Stanford and one economist at University of Chicago making a very interesting argument as a predictor of criminal behavior in people. And what these two did, Levitt and Donahue, they dealt with what was then emerging as a really interesting sociological phenomenon, which was that somewhere since the late 1980s, the crime rate in this country has been plummeting. Every city, every state, it's been going way down, and for years people have been wrestling with what's going on with the decreased crime rate. In general, if you have a more conservative bent, what you would emphasize is building of more prisons during this period, 3-strike laws, things like that that have put in more institutional punishment, more policing. If you have a more liberal bent, what you emphasize is how good the economy was during the 90s, but that winds up being problematic because the crime rate has continued to drop over the last 3-4 years amid the economy tanking. All these various explanations explain a bit of it, but what these guys argued was as follows, that the decreased crime rate that started in the United States in the late 1980s was due to Roe versus Wade. Here's what they would show. They would show that as each state would legalize abortion, you would have about a 12 to 15-year lag time before you would start to have the crime rate drop. The crime rate during the first 5 years of the crime rate dropping would entirely be due to fewer teenagers entering the criminal justice system. By the time it was a decade and a half or so past Roe versus past that first point, the dropping crime rate was entirely due to fewer 15 to 30-year-olds. And it just marched out from there state by state. What their numbers showed when they did what were apparently some pretty fancy, convincing statistics was that Roe versus Wade accounted for about 50% of the drop in crime. What's that telling you? One of the most depressing things I can imagine, which is a huge, huge predictor of growing up to be a violent, antisocial individual, is having been born when nobody wanted you to be born.